Anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and pray, then we're going to get back into Galatians chapter 5. Oh, I should actually pull out turn to the right page, that would help. And, after I pray, I think we left off partway through verse 20. Okay. Father, we thank you for being here with us tonight. We thank you for sending your Son to pay for our sins. We thank you for the relationship you've created, that we're your children and we can learn about you. And we ask that you would just guide us and help us to glorify you in all that we do. In Christ's name, amen. All right, when we're looking at it here in chapter 5, one of the things we finally got to the point where we're kind of turning the corner a little bit. This is still in light of the law, or the law coming in and replacing grace. So don't get the idea we left that. But this is getting into some more concrete examples of how to live our life now as we go on to chapter 5. And the first thing we have is don't do these things, and then we get into do these things, okay? Now, we hit some of them last week. We talked about in verse 19, we talked about the flesh, we talked about immorality, impurity, sensuality, we talked about sorcery, pharmakia, and also had to talk about the idea that you can't read pharmacy back into the original because that was extracted from the original word, not the other way around. So it doesn't mean that medicines are evil or something like that. But now we're getting down to, in verse 20, these are also kind of grouped into, some of these are grouped into similar type offenses, okay? Now we're in verse 20 where it says, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, and factions. And it goes on beyond that. The one thing I was going to say in this whole group here that I just mentioned, all of these pretty much involve lack of self-control, where people are just losing it in one way or another. And not only that, but if we see this lack of self-control in our lives, that should be removed from our lives. And that's what Paul is really saying here is, guys, this shouldn't be characteristic of a believer. True believers shouldn't be behaving this way. Not that we don't sometimes, but it shouldn't be. The first one, where we see enmities. Well, I had trouble with that word, pronouncing it, even though it's a simple word. In that one there is basically just a general hatred. There's no, as far as what the original means, just in general, just someone who's just generally hates people or hates what's around. And I don't mean that you're discouraged by it. I don't mean you're depressed or something. There's just an actual hatred that's going on as far as how the people treat other people. The next one I was going to say is strife. Strife is somewhat self-explanatory, but I would say discord, bickering. And one of the things also you got to look at is that shouldn't be going on in the church. Now, does that mean we shouldn't be disagreeing with each other? No, we can disagree, but hopefully not in a disagreeable manner. So that's what he's really talking about here. I mean, in other words, we can hold different opinions, that's not a problem, but we shouldn't be shouting and screaming at each other. We shouldn't be backbiting and doing all that kind of stuff, which is characteristic of this. The next word I want to spend a minute or two on here is jealousy, it's translated. Jealousy, I wouldn't say it's a bad translation, but it's not actually the translation I would use, but the word that I would use would confuse everyone. This actually is the word from zelato, which is zeal, which we get in English. So when it's saying jealousy here, really it's a zeal. And the one thing I was going to say about that word is in this case, because it's grouped in with all these negative words, we understand this is a lack of self-control again in this manner. And jealousy is probably a good way to say it in the English. But the word zeal, zelato, that's not a bad word in the Greek. It can be a good word or a bad word. I mean, zeal is a great thing if you're using it for the right causes. It's a terrible thing if you're using it for selfish ambitions and things of that nature. Before I go to the next word, do we have any thoughts, any ideas, any questions, anything else? Yeah, please.
I have a question.
Sure.
So looking at the first word in verse 21, envy.
Yes.
In English, jealousy and envy are used interchangeably.
Yeah.
So what are the nuances that he's trying to get at here?
Well, that's the thing. That's why I'm a little uncomfortable with jealousy. That's the word that is, let me see here. Yeah, that is the word that's actually, let's say Zalos here, but Zalao it comes from. And that's the word where it's the envying is, boy, I really want what that guy's got. There's something more here. How would you explain this with zeal? It's really a zeal for negative things, I guess is what
I
it's
was gonna
saying.
say for the wrong things, I think.
It is. So, as I said, I'm not totally comfortable with jealousy and envying as the two words because you're right. I would consider those two pretty much synonyms in English. These would not be synonyms in the Greek. So that's really what we're looking at there, where we're looking at somebody who really has a desire to do the wrong thing, maybe is the way to put it.
I don't know if they're really synonyms in English. I mean,
Well, no, they're not exact,
like a
but
love
they're
triangle,
close.
you got jealousy
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
two women fighting over the same guy or something. But you wouldn't call that envy.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I don't have any personal knowledge
Yeah, okay,
of that,
yeah.
of course. But you wouldn't call that envy.
Yeah, well,
Envy is like somebody
Oh, I know what you're
gets
saying.
a promotion at work,
Right.
and you feel like
Yeah.
you should have.
I want that promotion, yeah. I mean, but they can be used interchangeably at times. They're
They
pretty
can,
close,
yeah.
and I'm not saying they're always interchangeable, but I would say that the Greeks not.
interchangeably incorrectly.
Well, that's
People
possibly
use the
so.
wrong word.
Yeah,
But if you say envious and then jealous,
yeah.
you can tell there's two separate things there.
They are,
With
but
me,
they're
I
pretty
mean,
close.
saying it
Like,
that way.
okay, if they're the
Well-
same when we say our God is a jealous God, is he an envious God?
Well, again, here's what you got to remember. Every
That helps me clarify.
many words have multiple meanings. So therefore, what we're saying is these two. I think there are times jealousy and envy could be, done crosswise, but not all the time. So that's what you got to remember there also. So I mean, that's why certainly you can find meanings where if you switch the two, you go, huh? What are you talking about?
So for me, I always think jealousy is about my things. Like for the jealous wife, jealous husband, this is my wife, my
Oh, I see
husband.
what you're saying.
Versus
Okay.
envy is about
Yeah,
what
yours.
other
I want your
people-
stuff. Right. I
Yeah.
agree.
So that's why I always try to make sure
Okay.
so I use the right words.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, like I said, this is something where I wouldn't get too picky on what it is. The main thing this is showing is, especially in verse 20, is that these are things that are just, they shouldn't be in a Christian's life, and not only that, but they really involve just not controlling yourself. I mean, if you're sitting there envious of somebody all day long, or jealous, either one, there's a problem with something in your life doing that. And I got to say this also, there are times in my life, sure, everybody's probably been envious or jealous. And it's amazing to me how many times I've been envious or jealous of something, and then later on look at what happened a year or two later, and it's like, wow, I'm glad I didn't get that. Thank you very much, Lord. There are times when you just, it's funny too, because sometimes, you're envious. When I was a teenager and stuff, wow, they got a great marriage and stuff, and then, gunfire the next week or something. It's kind of, maybe not gunfire, but seriously, it's the kind of thing where sometimes you're like, wow, okay, I guess God's got something else in mind type
Well,
thing,
if
so.
you think back to junior high or middle school or whatever,
Yeah.
who were the cool kids?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, I know.
and you know what happens to them later.
Right.
Some of the ones in
No,
my
it's true.
school were like felons.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're
Yeah.
unemployed bums.
No, you're right. That's
you
true.
know? I mean,
That's
some
true.
of them, not all of
I
them.
hope they're not watching this broadcast.
And the geeks are ruling.
I don't
Yeah,
think
and the
they are.
geeks are ruling the world. Let's face it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I was an unusual one. I was a geek jock, so it was kind of unusual in high school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
Unusual combination.
yeah, it was. I actually brought the two groups together in high school,
Oh, yeah.
which it actually really did helped. So there's some that became friends that never would have become friends otherwise. We all got together, and it's like, oh, yeah, we're not actually all that much different. So anyway, except that the geeks couldn't bench press 200 or something like that, like some of the jocks could, or whatever, 250. So anyway,
Do mental benching.
yeah, I'm rambling tonight. I got to stop that. Back on these words. I would say this in the Greek. I look at those two words and go, "Oh yeah, they're different." In the English, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I also see similarities as well because they are pretty similar to each other.
So actually, I have been potentially misusing the word jealous my entire life.
Yeah, that's possible.
So looking at the difference between jealousy and envy, jealousy is a three-person dynamic.
Okay.
Centers around the fear of losing something you already possess.
Okay.
Core feelings of fear, anxiety, and possessiveness.
Okay.
Scenario, you might have something valuable and you feel threatened by a third party who might take it away. Envy.
You have a good
Yeah.
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 Exactly.
Yeah. And envy is a two-person dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
And centers around a desire for something that someone else possesses. That we're talking about. Core feeling resentment, longing, and sometimes bitterness. Jealousy is about fear of about fearing to lose what is yours.
Yeah.
Envy is about wanting what is theirs. Protective.
Right.
Yeah. But
Jealousy.
then God's
Yeah.
jealousy is you are mine.
Right, exactly.
Right.
He's not. He's not.
He's not worried.
Yeah.
No, but he doesn't want us worshiping worshiping idols or something, worshiping other gods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not envious.
Right.
He doesn't want to be
Right.
like the others.
And I would say this: if you're really good at envy, it doesn't have to be two-person. You can be envious of all kinds of people. So, anyway. So yeah. All right, no, that's a good distinction. I wouldn't have thought of that myself necessarily. Next one here, which is very interesting, I find. Next one is outbursts of anger. Okay.
Oh, that's
What? That's okay. That's okay.
I was going to do an outburst of anger, but
Oh, okay.
I couldn't
That's
follow
okay.
through.
I got you.
You gotta commit to it.
It was
Yeah.
it was an outburst of nothing.
Yeah, this is pretty much fits and rage.
Inverse.
Yeah, but think about this also. Something that's interesting is the Greek word for this one. The Greek word is thumos. Well, what do we get from thumos? It means hot. Literally, it means hot. So we got thermometers and things like that. So literally, in this case, we're talking about thumos type thing. We're talking about this is something where a person, visually, you can think about it, they're getting hot suddenly, and then suddenly they're not hot type thing. That's what it's talking about here, these outbursts of anger where someone is just unjustifiably. Now, something else we got to remember is Christ in the temple is a good example. When Christ was in the temple, he was angry. He actually made a whip. He drove people out of it. He overturned tables. That was thumos all the way. So thumos is not necessarily always a bad word also. It's much like zeal. It could be good or bad. But in this case, certainly it's talking about something bad here. The other thing also that you have to look at here is this is especially bad for church leaders. And obviously for employees as well and things of that nature. But I was going to say, if you look at church leaders, how can a person who's suddenly having these outbursts of people, and it's not just it happens once, but this is a repetitive thing in their life, you know what I'm saying? And then you're going to say, yes, now you're going to be our spiritual leader type thing. And I've seen that in churches. I've seen these people at times, they can be very abusive people. They can be abusive in relationships. They can be abusive in their churches. And the funny thing is that if you look at it, let's go sort of off script here deliberately for a moment. If you're familiar with cluster B personality disorders, antisocial personality, borderline, narcissistic, and histrionic disorders, okay? One of the things that's interesting on that is that, wait a second, hang on a second. There's a real reason for saying, oh yeah, if you look at that and start looking at those things and you start reading books about it, you know what you find? There are certain types of peoples and professions that are attracted to that come out of this cluster B. You know what they end up being? The cluster Bs often end up being pastors, psychologists, people that you wouldn't expect, counselors. Why? Because they can screw with people's lives. So the reason I say this is, it's funny, we did took a friend of mine who was also a believer. We went out and bought a monster coin collection about a month ago. Some of you guys told you about it. It was literally a ton, okay? So we got the thing, and one of the things we end up becoming friends with the people and talking with them and everything. And I mean, they end up, what do you do? Well, I do this, but then also talk to some of the things in church and everything. And basically, and I understood it, their words were, it doesn't necessarily buy you credibility with us believing you because you've been a pastor. Because it's like their attitude of and they're right, their attitude is, there's a lot of pastors that are just frauds, they're doing things like this, and the reason, and it's true, I can't deny it, I've met a bunch of them myself, some pastors are great guys. You've also got the pastors who are literally, in some cases, even have these personality disorders that are attracted to professions where they can control other people. So what I'm saying is, when you're looking for that, now that's the roundabout way of getting there, when you're looking for that, one of the things I look for in a pastor is, does he have outbursts of anger? Does he suddenly, a lot of times these are the same people that it will show, if you know what I'm saying, where they have outbursts of anger, things of that nature, a number of other things too, but my point is that might be something to look for, because you got somebody, if that's characteristic of their life, you got to say, maybe this person isn't the right person to be a pastor in a church. So any other thoughts here, any other diversions here? Again, I don't know if you've ever run into these people or not. And again, when you actually run into them, you find out we're not talking about someone who's a little bit off or something like that or has characteristics. We're talking about people who are just absolute, I guess going into mythology, I'd call them berserkers or something. And it's just totally, if you're familiar with that.
Usually worse than you think it
Yeah,
could be.
it's far, when you hit these people, it's really evil, is what it comes down to a lot of times. And beyond what you can imagine as far as how bad they can be. And when I've seen pastors get into these positions, wow. I can name churches, I'm not going to now, but I can name one after another. Yeah, that guy got into it, destroyed the church. That guy got into it, destroyed the church, etc.
It doesn't have to be a big church either.
No,
I've
it
seen
doesn't.
in
I've seen it in
little
big
churches
and
as
small,
well.
both. Exactly. But it's something, unfortunately, and also the other areas, like I said, it's counselors and CEOs. CEOs also tend to go into this. They can be high achievers, but they tend to go into positions where they can destroy other people. Counselors in particular, and there's a number of stories that I've heard of with counselors that are just like, you got to be kidding me what they were doing. They were actually driving the people into their problems as opposed to helping them out of them. So again, with the bursts of anger, the reason I bring that up is I think a lot of times these people are also, most of the ones that I've known have been characterized by outbursts of anger, outbursts of rage. And if you just watch the people, it's like, oh yeah, I see what's going on there. And again, obviously be careful of them, especially in a church situation. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Well, maybe it's interesting.
Mhm.
I look at this list of things.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them I see as this. This is up for discussion. Some of them I see these as these are things that are easy to fall into. In fact, I'm going to have a little bit of this one, a little bit
Right.
of that one, all throughout my life,
Right.
depending on what's going on.
Right.
Even this outbursts of anger.
Right.
If you put enough things going wrong in my
Right.
life,
Oh yeah.
then there's the trigger. It's
Right.
like
Right.
I'm letting somebody have it,
Right.
or and to some degree.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Even it doesn't have to be a true great outburst. It
No,
can just
but
be a
it's-
little bit. You
yeah.
know? But then there's other things in here. It's like I kind of view as that's like, let's just say it starts with idolatry.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a little bit of idolatry or a little bit of witchcraft. So that's why I'm kind of just throwing out there. as an
Well, you
idea.
might be surprised. Let me throw this at you. You say a little bit of witchcraft, okay?
I've been holding that back since the beginning.
What's that?
Nope.
Get it out.
Okay.
A little bit of orgy.
Oh,
We haven't gotten there yet.
by the way, that word, the word may actually be, there is a Greek word that's orge, that's talking about anger, as well as thumos. So it's orge. That's a proper way to pronounce it. It has nothing to do with the other
No.
English words, huh?
No, we haven't come to that one yet.
Oh, we haven't?
No.
I must have a different word.
Which verse are we talking about?
Come on, 21.
21. Envying, drunkenness, carousing.
Carousing.
I got carousing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I got a different word there in the NASB.
Verse 21.
Yeah,
Envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things
I got carousing.
Yeah, I got
Oh,
And
okay.
carousing is
Well,
probably, let me say
similar.
this, carousing is probably, yeah.
bit of carousing.
Let me say this, yeah. When we explain what that word means in the Greek, it's going to make more sense to you. Because that word, I think carousing is a much better word for it in this case. I understand orgies being in there as well, but now I understand it. So, no, but carousing makes more sense. Back to what you're talking about. No, I don't think there's anybody around that doesn't have some anger at times and things like that. Even if it's quiet anger, it's, whatever. So that's not what he's talking about here. I think what he's talking about is, this is what you're known by. These are the characteristics that make obvious, and it doesn't, I'll say this, I've known very godly men and women that at one point in time in their life were so overwhelmed, they were just like, that's it, throw their hands up and scream, and then they're fine after that. I wouldn't say that they blew their whole Christian life because of that or something. You know what I'm saying? And take an extreme example, okay? You've just been in fights and literally seeing, demons knock things over and tear people apart and everything else, and then you're just going to go, oh, and life is peaceful. No, there's some emotional stuff that goes on at times, and that's obviously an extreme example. But no, with stuff, let me say this. I mentioned it beforehand, we're joking about it, but Linda her birthday's tomorrow, 66 years old. Now, we've been trying for more than a year to get her onto Medicare, which she qualifies for and everything else, and the government can't do it and can't get the number. And at this point in time also, we're probably going to have trouble because they ever do get her on Medicare, and I'm carrying extra high insurance premiums now. If they ever do get her on Medicare, they're probably going to say, oh, but you weren't on it at the window when you're supposed to get into it. Now you got surcharges. But you're all the pay, and they've even said, yes, you've got all the paperwork in, everything's done.
It was on time.
It was on time, yeah, during that window. And we're a year after her birthday now, and still can't get her on that. So that's the type let me say this, there's been one or two times around our house where I think one of the two of us, or both of us probably just said a few words about the government that weren't kind, okay?
I did.
Yeah, I know I did too. So I'm not saying that you're never going to be angry or anything.
Right.
But certainly, and that's a good point, because sometimes, and it's funny, it goes back to personality disorders also. People hear things with these personality disorders, oh, well, he's got some of those characteristics. That's not what those personality disorders are. Those are things where if you met people and knew the difference between a narcissist and a narcissistic personality disorder, or someone who has narcissistic tendencies, they're three different things. And when you finally meet like the narcissistic personality disorder, it's like, whoa, okay, now I got it. It's almost impossible to understand until you meet somebody who's that extreme. So, but I think in this case, what Paul's saying is this certainly shouldn't be. If somebody thinks of it, Jim, if somebody would say, I know Jim, yeah, he's the guy that's always losing his temper. Not that you are, obviously. That's why I picked that. Then it would be the kind of thing where you look at it and you go, okay, this is obviously a problem. On the other hand, if you lose your temper once, okay, it happens. It's a big difference, or twice or whatever. It's a big difference.
Maybe you should stop putting your bottle on his table.
Yeah, you're right. That's what it's all about. I know.
That's why he's angry.
Right, exactly. I know. Exactly.
My table.
Yeah, I was about to say, what do you mean his table? Right. No, exactly. We've actually talked about and agreed to share this corner of the table, so I can have that there.
We got a little more.
Exactly, right. Exactly. Yeah, I'm jealous. Right. I'm jealous of that corner, and I'm not giving it up. He's envious of that corner.
Go Sharpie to mark up.
Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna have to do that. All right. So those things there we got there. Let's go back to this list now. We're still in verse 20. Disputes. Disputes might be better translated rivalries. Question. Should we be playing sports where we're hitting each other and knocking each other down and having all kinds of rivalries and everything else? And, I remember growing up Dallas week in Washington, D.C., you could see somebody killed on a street corner just about if they had a Dallas jacket on. Is that wrong or is that a problem or what are we talking about here? Because those are rivalries, aren't they?
Killing probably about good.
Killing is success, right.
Killing qualifies.
Right, exactly. Actually, that's right. I forgot when Zemo went up to Philadelphia and got the snot beaten out of him up in Philadelphia years ago. If you're old enough to remember that. The Redskins mascot. Oh, yeah. The Philadelphia Eagles fans just beat the snot out of him.
Any Philadelphia fans?
That's in Philadelphia, yeah.
The Philadelphia thing.
But anyway, what I was going to say is, no, is that a problem? Should we be putting kids into situations like football where we're knocking each other down and everything else? Is that a problem? What do you think?
I'm confused by the word because a dispute is like a normal thing.
Yeah, well, disputes there, rivalries is probably a better translation is what I'm saying.
Dissensions is what I have.
Dissensions is a good one also.
I had rivalries and dissensions.
Yeah. Okay, that's complete. But just as part of this, obviously we're talking about dissension stuff. We're talking about something different than sports, but rivalries is in there. What are we talking about?
Well,
Is that a problem?
it's easy to let sports morph into, think of all the Little League parents that start
Well, that's true.
screaming at the umpires.
Yeah.
Or the kids.
all that
Let me say this: I'm leading you down a dark garden path, trying to lead you in the wrong direction. Because my personal opinion is this: there is nothing wrong with going out playing football where you both agree what you're doing and knocking a snot out of somebody as long as you both agree to be there. It's wrong if you find somebody in a street corner and decide to do that or something like that. But
Or
football,
in church.
or in church, exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, you should have seen the hip check I did last week. Yeah, exactly. But the point is that I don't think this applies at all to sports. The reason I bring this up is I have run into people that have used verses like this to talk about the fact that it's wrong to have children competing, it's wrong to have sports competitions, it's wrong to have rivalries. No, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not what it's talking about. This is talking more along the ideas of the dispute, the idea of this would be talking about just going in a whole different direction. The rivalries, yes, rivalry more like, I'm better than you type thing. How often have you seen that in church? Fortunately, we don't have a lot of that in this church, I don't think. But I mean, a lot of churches, the whole thing, it's like a perverse country club or something like that, where everybody's trying to prove they're better than somebody else.
Who's the holiest?
Exactly. Who's the holiest? Exactly. Who's the holiest or who's whatever? Exactly. So that's more like what it's talking about here. I don't think it's talking about sports rivalries at all, or football, or anything else. I have no problems against that. I don't watch football anymore, but that's because of the personalities, not because of the game. Still love the game. So,
But I thought, and this is referring to a personal level, rivalries between two people.
Yeah, this is talking about somebody as a believer. What he's saying to the Galatians is, as Galatian believers, you shouldn't be known as somebody who's got rivalries, who's always trying to put yourself above somebody else, who's trying to put down other people, who's trying to always have a dispute about something. Where
It does say deeds. It's like deed is just an action, right?
What version are you looking at? Deeds would be.
Now the deeds of the flesh are evident.
Yeah, exactly. All the acts. These are all. We're talking about what these deeds are now. What these actions are. The acts of the flesh. And one of the acts of the flesh we're talking about is disputes or rivalries.
Right.
And that's one of the things where, again,
Now,
this should be characteristic.
We may
of
not
it.
have gotten to what, in my translation, is party spirit. Is that another? Is that the
Party
next?
spirit. Let me
But if you are led by the Spirit,
Like factions, maybe
disputes, dissensions, and factions, I've got after disputes.
dissensions and factions.
Yeah, and that's still coming up. Dissensions are next, and factions. I would say this: dissensions and factions. The first thing I think about is, especially in a church. I mean, think about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is my pew. This is my friends. This is. How many times do we actually go out of our way? We're not that many visitors, but how many times we go out of our way to welcome visitors? I started practicing that when I was a teenager, realizing, you know something, and we're actually pretty good at it in this church. Yeah, no, we are. But think about it. I'm speaking generically now, not this church necessarily. But think about it. How many churches have you gone to? I never remember. Well, I'm not going to name the church now. One fairly good sized church I went to, medium to large church, and I came home from Linda and I said, I had tried it when we were looking for a church many years ago, and I went back later on, had the same thing happen. Okay, years later, and I said, we are going to make a fortune. Because I had perfected my formula for invisibility, obviously. Because there wasn't a single, not only did they not talk to me, but let me tell you what happened. I went and actually decided I'm not one of these people. When I go to a new church, I don't sit in the back row. Actually, I did here, but besides that, normally I don't. Small church, that's why. I went and sat, maybe about 5 or 10 pews back from the pulpit, toward the middle of the thing, everything else. Got there early, stayed late to see what happened. Not a person talking to me. One guy actually comes up and comes running across with his hand out from the row behind me. And I'm thinking like, well, he wants to talk, okay? Goes, actually no, same row as me. Goes running back, bangs into my knee with his knee, leans across me to his friend in the row ahead of him. Hey, how you doing? Never says a word to me after banging into me, and then goes, that's this church. That's invisibility. I went and talked to people, tried to talk to people. Nobody wanted to talk. And this was a church that, again, I'm not going to mention it, but all you would know this church. And I was shocked at how bad it was.
You must have had a very, poor ability in, what do you call it?
Well, it's funny. It's funny. Let me say this. I talked to some other people who had come with the same impression of it, not just me.
Do you have some-
But no, it's
teasing,
true.
obviously.
No, it's true.
T-shirt with some kind of offensive.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Right.
Approachability. That's what I was saying.
Yeah,
Your
exactly.
approachability was very poor.
But let me say this seriously. I talked to other people same church. I'm not going to name it, but there
Yeah.
are other people who had the same feeling about that particular church.
So they've got a
Yeah. But what happens?
They have other people though.
Clicks.
Yeah. Clicks.
Factions. And not just that, but factions also. How many times have you seen this? It's not just factions for friendships, but factions for, we want this type of church music. We want this type of church music. And I'm not saying... carpeting. Building projects, etc. And it's not wrong to have different... It's fine to have different views on this. It's wrong when we start using that as weapons against each other, basically, and breaking into groups over this and things of that nature. That's when it
or
becomes
you
factions.
start taking positions about a building project just because so and so
Yeah.
in the group
That-
that you
exactly.
consider yourself in,
Right.
you
You go along with them. Exactly. So that's the type of thing we're talking about here. But honestly, if you've grown up in churches, if you've been to enough churches, if you've been visiting enough churches and seen them, factions are obvious. I mean, I think that's one of the most overwhelming things in the modern church that I see as far as a fault. Don't see it here really nearly as much as most churches. I really
We're
don't.
so small, we have one faction.
Yeah, exactly. We're small enough we have one faction. You're right.
I mean,
No, but you're right.
Actually, not.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal here. But it is in a lot of, trust me, if you go to other churches, it is. I know a lot of people here literally grown up in this church and don't have the experience of visiting other churches. Linda and I, because we moved around, you asked me the other week, we've been to a lot of churches. I don't know how many, but we've been to a lot of churches. Often we've moved, sometimes because the doctrine goes away or they go different directions. Sometimes it's because we moved or things like that physically, where it was the last church, one of the big reasons we left that, it was just too far to go to.
Oh, yeah.
It was, 23 miles from our house and in a different county. Yeah. So, things like that. So, there's various reasons to go away from churches. But the point is, once you've gone to enough of them, you start realizing, there's a lot of factions in them. And that should be what defines the church. Yeah.
2 comments. Hopefully I'll remember them both. Excuse me, really more examples. So, talking about how churches treat visitors. So, I don't get a lot of chance to visit other churches since
Right.
I have obligations
Right.
here. But the Sunday, sometimes I don't want to be approached.
Yes, I understand that.
And so the Sunday after we lost Finley, I went to a different church.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to blend in.
Sure.
And that particular church had the thing where they said, all right, if you're a visitor, stand up.
I know.
This was a large church.
Oh yeah, I
It was a
believe.
large
Right.
church,
No
with
one will
big
notice.
auditorium,
Exactly.
Just stay down.
stage, like
Right.
you know,
Right.
drum set on the thing.
Right.
I was not expecting that there. Like, all right, stand up. All right, everybody, go greet the visitors.
Right,
And
exactly.
I'm just like, I sat on the back row on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
And I just like head down, and I could feel it. They were coming.
Yeah, I know, I understand.
It's like, no, I don't want any interaction right now. I'm barely holding it together.
Right.
So that I found that interesting.
And you're right. We have to be sensitive to that too. It's like they paint a giant bullseye on you. Let me say this: when we had greeting times at the church I was at before, I mean, that when I was pastor of the church, when we did that, and some people liked it, some people didn't. We never did with the visitors stand up. No way. I've seen churches do that. However, what we did is everybody stand up, walk around, talk to people for a few minutes or something like that. Then it doesn't feel so bad sometimes. But when you've got visitors stand up, and I do remember also when I was younger years ago, they had a special thing. If you're a visitor, you're supposed to wear this tag and a pin, okay? I know, it's like, all right, we don't want to, but sure, why? I know. We did it, okay? Guess what? Not a single person in the entire thing said a single word to any of us or looked at us, shook hands, anything. And, this is a visitor-friendly church. No, it isn't. So, but I understand what you're saying. That's something. It's also the reason why I think things have changed as far as door-to-door evangelism.
Oh,
You got to be. It doesn't work the way it used to and stuff like that.
it didn't really work up here.
Well, no, it did in some places for quite a while, but it really doesn't anymore. At least not in a lot of cases. Some cases it does, but in a lot of cases it doesn't.
So the other comment, there was a thing that came out from it was somewhere from Lifeway or place in the Southern Baptist Convention that furnishes resources, and so it was about hospitality. And the guy, he's on staff, but they were talking about they had to move and they had to find a new church. And after a year of searching for a new church, he's like on staff at Lifeway. He's telling his wife, he's like, I don't know how we're going to find a new church.
Right.
They could not find a place where they felt wanted.
Right.
Like they were going to small groups.
Right.
And they did not feel wanted
Yeah.
by the small groups. People weren't engaging with them.
Yeah.
I mean, and like this is a guy who like his job was to, and actually he's writing a whole thing about being hospitable, like on a cruise.
Right.
He
Yeah.
just gotten back from a cruise, and he's like, what if churches like made it their business to be hospitable like they are on cruises,
Right.
kind of thing. I'm sure that analogy goes off.
No,
somewhere, 'cause I've never been
but
on a
there's some
cruise.
truth in that. And let me say this:
Yeah.
Linda and I, when we've had the church for churches, we found a lot of the same stuff. It's amazing how bad the churches are out there in many cases. And I don't want to sound like I'm smashing all the churches, but I'm not. But there are so many of them that are bad. One of the reasons we ended up here was because the people were friendly. You know, it's not like we encountered elsewhere. One of the friendliest we ever hit was years ago at Glendale. Oh, that was an incredible church. Unfortunately, the leadership there, one leader was the problem there. But I was going to say, again, we've gone to churches specifically because of the friendliness of the church and because they did want that. Let me say this also. I know, actually, you know Kevin. Kevin, I think he may have found something in South Carolina. I'm not sure. They've been looking for a year or two for churches down there, and it's just, and they're in the Bible Belt. And basically, they're finding the church that he's in right now, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's okay. It's decent. It's a decent church, but it's totally lacking in that area. And the other churches they went to, one after another, he told me the stories about them, and I'm like, whoa, we'd be swapping stories on what we'd seen in churches and stuff. And actually, up in Pennsylvania, he had the same issues. Just some amazingly bad churches as far as being friendly goes. And doctrinal issues also, but just the friendliness stuff they just fail on, no question. It's like, do you really want people in this church or not? And in truth, let's be honest, there's a number of people that don't want new people in their church because after all, this is the way we got to set up. It's our church. We don't want new people here. They're going to get in the way. They're going to start meddling.
Has the Bible Belt always been like that, or
No. This is something where a lot of what I'm saying is that's an area where you would expect the best Bible churches.
you would
in the
expect
world.
it?
You
But I'm just
expect
saying,
it.
like,
No.
is it like maybe a new understanding of what it has been, or
No,
is it
you've always had churches
Might
like this.
not be a difference between urban and rural areas.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the rural,
No, I think
small
it-
churches in rural
Yeah,
areas
he's tried both.
tend to be that way.
He's tried both. And no, it's actually the larger churches, the smaller, doesn't make any difference, he's telling me.
All right.
I've been amazed at what he's been telling me down there. He's in the Carolinas. So, and he, in some cases, I mean, he was looking at, possibly driving 40 or 50 miles just to a church on Sundays just to get something where he could, they were friendly and where they actually preached the word of God.
You know,
Yeah.
Both.
being friendly is there's a skill.
Yeah, there is.
Being friendly, non-confrontational conversation that's
Right.
just that maintains some kind of interest in the other person. But then there's we've also just gone through the invention of the cell phone, the isolation that the social media brings, then COVID. We are. I mean, that's the trifecta, I guess.
It is.
Of against how to be friendly
Right.
to church.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
I find it difficult,
Yeah.
you know, because I'm just mean spirited and unfriendly.
If we get their cell phone number as soon as they come in, we can start texting them.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly.
And don't let up either. You keep texting.
Right. Exactly. Never
During the
stop.
service.
Exactly. Exactly. You got it. You got
Did
it.
you hear that? What the pastor just said? I think
Right.
he's talking to you.
Actually, it's funny when you say that. When you say that, I looked at Linda once or twice, and I've actually had cases where I'm like, "Hold me back! I'm going up there." You know, there were things that were said that were just like, "No way." And I will say this: I will admit this. I usually wouldn't admit this in public, but I will admit it, and I think it was appropriate.
On video.
In this case. I know it's on video. I think it was appropriate. About 25 years ago, I went to a pastor and I said, "If you ever do that again, you watch. I will get out of the congregation. I will grab you by the collar. I will drag you out of this church, and I will throw you out the front door." I said, "You just watch. Try me, and you'll see what happens." And in that case, I think it was absolutely appropriate. One of the few cases I would ever say that. And
Say
it,
calmly, not in a fit of rage.
no, it would not have been a fit of rage. It would have been calmly, but with what he had just done and what I saw and what he was doing to people, no, it would have actually been appropriate in that case. And honestly, it did help in that case. He at least backed down off doing that some. But that's not my normal method either. I don't usually go threaten people, okay? Hi, I'm at church. I'm ready to threaten you today. No, it's not what it is. But in one case, it had to be
It's
that
not
way.
on the list.
Yeah, you're right.
Threatening.
You're right.
I mean,
Oh, it's
Fits,
okay.
man.
it sounds like
You're right. Threats are out on the list. Okay. You were saying?
I'll just say, so I kind of think that we could,
Yeah.
it's an area where we can improve. Don't know how to do it. I guess, but you practice it. But who wants to do that if you're,
how to improve being friendly?
yeah,
Well, you can practice
you
it.
know? Well, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You try to, but it's
I mean, I don't know. You guys are pretty friendly.
Yeah. Well, in general, I would agree. But another, each person, something else you got to remember.
pretty friendly.
Pretty
Yeah.
friendly.
We're looking also at something else.
Who are you talking to?
Are you trying to go from level 8 to level 9?
Well, I don't know.
We're
Make it
generalizing.
better.
One thing,
Sometimes we
we're
go to
generalizing
11.
here, okay? As a church, by the same time, this is really talking to all the individuals in the church. So no matter how friendly you get as a church, there's always going to be some unfriendly individuals or people who just can't do it. And not only that, I also don't want to make it like, well, if you're an introvert and it's so bad that you just can't talk to people, you're out. That's not what I mean, obviously. There are some people that it would be so murderous for them to try to talk to other people. It would be crazy almost.
That was me as a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
I was so socially awkward.
Yeah,
You have to come and talk to me first, or you're not going to hear a word out of me.
right, exactly.
I've changed.
Yeah. But, yeah.
Some people would probably prefer that I regress a bit.
Well, this is more general than Christianity
Yeah.
in the church, but there's oftentimes, like, I'm in some kind of conversation with somebody, they say something, and it zooms past me, and then later, after I leave, I realize, oh, that was a perfect thing for me to ask them more about.
Right.
To actually show some interest as opposed to be all inside here
Right.
about.
May I make a suggestion? Where I practice, and seriously, I practice this. If you ask me where I've had the most evangelical experiences, chances to share the gospel, of any place else, there's one place that comes to mind: grocery stores. Grocery stores, sometimes, especially when it was COVID stuff going on, a bit shortage and everything. People want to talk about shortages. They want to talk about COVID. They want to talk about, well, gee, this produce is terrible. Whatever it is. My point is, especially then, I was having literally 5-6 times a week. I was having conversations about Christ in the grocery store, because whatever would happen is I looked for. I wouldn't come in, gee, these pineapples are overripe. Have you believed in Christ? Not like that, okay? But seriously, what could happen, for example, is, with COVID in particular, things seem like they're going crazy, and you got to wonder, is God still in control? All of a sudden, you're into talking about something, and you can morph that into other things. And what I found also, probably 2/3 of the time, I happened to hit people that were believers already. And they were thrilled. You mean you actually can talk about this openly? Yeah, you can too. When I used to do street evangelism down in 11th and F, down in front of the old Woody store down in D.C. when I was about 20 years old, we take the paint board down there and everything else, set up and start preaching on the street. And one of the things, we never saw a person come to Christ down there. And we got a couple of years, okay? Never saw one. But you know what I did see? A bunch of believers come to me afterwards and say, if you can do this, I can certainly witness to my neighbor or my coworker or whatever. It was encouraging the believers. That's why we kept doing it. So my point is that, no, I think that wherever you pick, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's wherever, there are places that we miss. And you're right. Even me, a lot of times, I'm like, oh, shoot, I should have had that one, you know. But 20 minutes later, you got the perfect line. Same thing for cutting people down, too. No, sorry. Yeah, I know.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, I know.
I have a pretty good insult comic.
Yeah, exactly, right.
It's a separate issue.
Yeah.
I think what Jim was talking about wasn't necessarily witnessing a stranger, but
Yeah. But even
trying to get more of a sense of belonging to the people that come to this church
Right.
semi-regularly.
Right. You're right.
And my biggest take on that is we just don't devote enough time to spending time together. You know, we come on Sunday and you have to pay attention during the worship service. You can't be talking while the singing's happening or the preaching's happening. And if you don't come to Sunday school, you know, there's just not very much opportunity to talk to people. And, you know, at least for me, it takes me a while to get to know people and like them. You know, I tend to not like people at first.
Yeah, I understand.
But
No, that's not necessarily negative. Some people just blend in and other people are just, I know what you're saying.
yeah. So
Well, there was. Do you remember? Oh shoot, Joe and
Bowls.
The
the
bowls.
Bowls
Yeah, and the Woodruffs.
and the Woodruffs. But so
You know what edit them out on the video, Spence.
No, they were great.
Naming people.
They were
Yeah.
both military.
Oh, okay. I didn't
there
know.
was just something. Joe
It was
especially.
easy. Yeah.
She was so good at conversation
Oh, I see
and
what you're
being
saying.
friendly.
Okay.
It was just.
Yeah.
It was like.
Well, some people have a gift for that too.
Well, she obviously did. It was like, wow, that would be great because she's a person I would think of, like somebody who leaves the trail behind her of
Yeah.
of good feelings, and
Yeah.
everybody who had a little time with her
Yeah.
felt better after that little exchange.
And let me say this. You and I, just between our personalities, we're probably never going to be that person.
Right.
But-
Thank you very much.
No, I'm just being honest.
You're right, yeah.
But we can become closer to that if we practice. I mean, you can practice on being friendly. You can practice not only. You ever practice just walking up and saying hello to somebody or whatever, or shaking hands or whatever? It's not natural necessarily. I had to learn that and practice it years ago, and it's something where we can practice doing that. So now, like I said, I don't think either one of us are social pariahs, but by the same token, we're not the people that we're more organizational. We're more, you know what I'm saying. And when you look at that again, we can practice that, and that does come along.
And social isolation in general is a problem for
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
culture.
I like social isolation.
Yeah.
I do too.
But,
Well,
you
I
know,
do
people-
too.
yeah.
See.
Well,
Well, what
but,
you were,
but
you were,
sometimes it's
but,
nice
you
to
know,
go out.
for
Yeah.
people that don't have much of a life, it's nice when there's structured opportunities
Right.
to do things. If you have to initiate everything yourself,
Right.
host some party yourself,
Yeah.
do all this,
Oh yeah.
put yourself out there
Yeah.
and get rejected 10 times,
Right.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
There used to be more of a culture of hospitality. And
You're right.
Here's an organized thing where we're going to bring people together and
Right.
do this thing every 2 weeks, every week.
One of the things I actually like about this Bible study is we have a chance to talk and go back and forth and stuff. Whereas, really, if you want social interaction, I think studying the Bible in this Bible study is one of the better things to do in the church. That's my personal opinion, but I'm thinking that that's a good way to do it. But you're right. Whether it's a Bible study, whether it's getting together for games or whatever, yeah, and that type of stuff. It does happen some, but by the same token, it can always happen
I think a
more.
lot of people are looking for that. And
Yeah, you're
they
right.
go to church in hopes of finding that.
You're right.
But if they're not going to find it if they only go to the
No, you're right.
service.
You're right.
you know.
You're right. Yeah, you don't find it. Sunday morning service is not the place for that typically, especially when you're all sitting in rows and everything.
well, I could start having those 15-minute awkward times of greeting.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. All right, let's get back into the text here for a minute here, because I want to go to verse 21. When we're leaving 20 and going to 21, there is a difference between the Byzantine and the Alexandrian manuscripts in one respect. And many of the Alexandrian manuscripts, does anybody have King James here?
I got a parallel.
Please read 21 in the King James, the beginning of it.
Oh, I know what you say.
Envyings, murders.
Okay, stop.
Okay.
Murderers is not in the Alexandrian text. So that's been either added to the King James, added to the Byzantine text, or was left out of the Alexandrian. I personally think it was probably added to the King James text, not King James, the Byzantine
Yeah, I have
text.
the RSV. They don't have it, but they have it in the footnote.
Right, exactly. So that is there. Now let me say this. I think that, one of the things you've got to look at here is murderers is probably, when you're looking at it, I don't remember too many murderers in the churches that I've been to, if you know what I'm saying. By the same token, sometimes when you look at the spirit of the way people treat each other, well, wait a second, murderers kind of fits in that. You're not really killing them physically, especially if you look about Christ. You call him a fool, same thing as murder. Now, here's the thing you got to remember also then, it's weird because Christ and Paul both called people fools. So obviously that's a whole other subject there for what did he really mean by that. But I think also it has to be, there are times when to say, hey, this is a fool saying this. At times, you got to be very sparse with that. By the same token, if you're just walking around, calling everybody fools and everything else and putting people down, that's another story. I think that's what they were probably talking about. But that's another story there. But murderers has been inserted probably before the word drunkenness. And as I said, that's either there or not there. We'll let you decide on that. Were you going to say something? I thought you were.
No,
Okay.
I probably had a passing thought, but I don't remember what it was anymore.
One of the things also that I want to point out here, actually we'll come back to that. Let's go to the word envying. We've already really talked about that. One thing I do want to say, it's fine to emulate someone that has something, doing something you want. It's wrong to envy them. But if I see somebody, you mentioned friendship, you mentioned those people who are very friendly and stuff like that. It's fine to emulate them. It's when you're envying them, that's when it becomes a problem. And we've already talked about envying with jealousy. I want to get, let me see, drunkenness. Drunkenness here, I would say this, the way it's being used, I don't think that's talking just about alcohol in this case. Now, it's certainly, drunkenness with alcohol is certainly a problem. But I think it could apply to other substances, but also I think it can be a general lifestyle that we're talking, a totally out of control lifestyle. It's not unheard of for that word to be used that way in the Greek, and in this case, I could see it that way. It could go either way. Certainly would apply to drunkenness as far as physical drunkenness goes. But it might be more than just, hey, I don't drink alcohol, so I'm cool. But by the same token, my life's totally out of control. Before we start talking about how cool we are for not drinking, we may want to think about that.
Yeah, well, there were other mind-altering substances back then.
Yeah, there were, and there are
Not
today
just
also.
alcohol.
Exactly. So it could be either one, and and even then, even if we talk about mind-altering substances, we have to look at things. Well, many medications we take today are mind-altering in one way or another. So there's thresholds there and stuff. When we're talking about the drunkenness, it's totally out of control, things like that, I think it's talking about. So that's pretty self-explanatory. The next one's the one I want to get to, because that is translated evidently in some of your versions as orgies. I have it as carousing.
Carousing.
Okay. Here's why I think carousing is a better word for this, okay? Linda, do you remember what this word is in particular in Greek?
No.
You may have been the one that told me originally, but I looked it up also, okay? That's why I asked that. Carousing specifically refers to parades for pagan gods. Unlike some of these words, like zeal, for example, which can be positive or negative, or thumos, which can be positive or negative, this word carousing is always a negative word. So in those parades for the pagan gods, you may have had orgies going on as well in that time period as well, but the carousing is just, this is a parade to celebrate a pagan god, and you're going to do whatever you feel like doing. That's what it's talking about, a carousing. Now, we get English words like carousing as well, we talk about, and we capture that somewhat, don't get me wrong, but this is specifically related to pagan god celebrations. So that's why when someone said about the orgies, it's like, well, okay, kind of, but it could be part of it. But this can be a lot of other things as well. And definitely as far as, if you're going down the street celebrating a pagan god and throwing bottles through windows or stuff like that, whatever. And I would say this, today, we don't have so much the pagan gods. By the same token, we do have a lot of things that we kind of idolize and put up on things. I look at, no matter what your political view is, I look at this past month or two with all the Teslas being vandalized and firebombed and everything like that. And I was like, I don't care what side you're on. People aren't supposed to be out there firebombing things and destroying them for fun. To me, that almost fits the carousing definition, in some ways better than others. They're doing it to worship something else, basically. Obviously not God. So, and again, I'm using that just as an example. We could have found many examples. Yeah.
Well, the first thing that came to mind for me was the pride parades.
Yes, the pride parades definitely.
And they actually had temple prostitutes and things like that with all the
They
pagan
did.
religions as well.
They
So
did.
who
The
knows?
pride parades wouldn't be nearly so bad if they weren't just trying to undress in front of kids, though. I mean, that's like the worst.
It would still be
the
bad.
worst
It would still be
part.
bad, but that's the worst part. And not only that, Frank, some of the things they display and show, and so I'm not even
yeah.
the human bodies, but I mean the things they display. It's like, good grief! I'm not even going to mention them here.
Yeah, I remember there was like a story that came out that a bunch of parents front ran a story hour at a library.
Oh yeah,
And it was just parents there.
Yeah.
And the person had like all their clothes on. I was like, well, I guess he's not going to show his crotch now.
yeah, exactly.
Because
But you're right.
there's no kids there to show it to.
Let's
so.
keep any of these library story hours where they're doing that and everything. I agree. Let me go back to one other thing also that ties kind of in a little bit with the pagan god idea. And I wanted to mention earlier. You mentioned something about, well, we're not into witchcraft. Okay, obviously, I haven't seen any. If anybody in this church is casting spells, please let me know. I'd like to know about it. I don't know of anybody in this church casting spells. Okay. Let me tell you something, though, that I have seen in many churches, in people's cars, for example, and I saw it at Grace and had to talk to people about it. You guys have the, dream catchers. Those dream catchers are meant for spiritual contact with demons. They are not, you know what I'm talking about with dream. They're round and they have this weaving in it and then they have feathers in them and stuff. Yeah,
They're
that kind of.
associated with Native Americans.
Yeah, generally Native Americans, but those are specifically for using with demonic stuff. So I would say this, they're not all that different from witchcraft. Now, let me say this, most of the people didn't know they were that. Oh, it's a pretty ornament type thing, if you know what I'm saying. But sometimes we have things that we don't even recognize as being witchcraft or demonic, and they are. We've had things we've thrown out of our house because we can't even realize what they were, and things of that nature as well.
Well, the dream catchers are specifically to keep evil spirits away from your dreams.
Yeah, okay. I remember there's something to do with the demons and the evil spirits. So the point being is, if you start thinking about it, sometimes we have to be kind of careful to look at where these things come from, because sometimes, and again, I do remember one person that I really offended by telling them. I wasn't nasty about it, but really offended. Hey, this is a demonic spiritual thing you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. They didn't believe me, and that's fine. That's up to them. But sometimes I was going to say, not so clear cut on what Christians are and are not involved in sometimes, because we don't even realize it sometimes. And others, sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, so maybe that's it, but I don't care.
Well, some people go too far, though, like the days of the week.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I'm not,
The Norse gods
Agreed.
are like 4 of the 7 days of the week.
Right, exactly.
And some people have said, oh, they should.
And not only that,
names.
what about the planet? Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune,
No,
etc.,
that's
Mars?
not,
Okay.
that's
I agree. I don't have any problem talking about the planet Jupiter or something like that, okay? By the same token, no, the dream catchers go well beyond that.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying.
But you're right. Sometimes you got to be careful not to go too far on it. Or not only that, 1,700 years ago on the third hill from the right outside of Rome, there's a person who... No.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes way too strong. Yeah, you're saying?
It's still, so my wife has a dream catcher.
Yeah.
It's small, like you would say, an ornament.
Probably
And
has no idea what it's for.
I'm not saying
Right.
that they can't
Right.
be some doorway or something.
I understand.
I'm just saying this one, I don't, like, because you'll have people that are like, oh, this is selling, so I'm going to make whatever this is.
Yes.
Maybe there's a proper, like, if somebody hands me a voodoo doll, and to me this thing is just a doll,
Right.
I don't know what effect this has. I mean, to me, this is a piece of wood or whatever. This dream catcher, probably made in China, decorated the way that they think it is. To me, this is just an inanimate object. Maybe a real dream catcher has maybe more of an effect, because it's a net on top of a ring with a little, with like some. I mean, my wife's had feathers on it, but probably not even real.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't see that.
No, that's true. Yeah. Well, they were real. They weren't genuine.
They weren't.
They did exist, though.
Yeah. Oh, I believe they exist. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like my wife has her perception of this thing.
Right.
And I'm sorry to keep going back to this, but her perception of this is that this is basically an ornament,
Well, let me say something
and
else.
it
too.
doesn't go beyond that.
Let me
Like,
say
oh, it's
something else.
supposed to
Too.
keep.
I would
dreams
treat a person who's not going to church regularly or something like that differently than a church. If you're going to church regularly, it's like you're making a statement.
away. Yeah.
On the other hand, if on the other hand you've got somebody who's not going to church, maybe even a believer or something like that, and they're doing things that non-believers do, of course they do. They're not believers, or they're not. See what I'm saying? So I would also treat that differently. I don't go. Everybody's got a dream catcher, and try to tackle them and tear down their dream catchers.
Yeah, and I have. I mean, I'm just saying, like, even if I don't even know if she still has it anymore, but if it was like hanging up in her office, I don't think I would care.
Right.
But I'm not going to go hang any up.
Let me say here's where I thought it had an impact. What we do, especially at the church, has an impact on what people coming to this church see. Okay.
Yeah.
When I would go out in the parking lot and see a number of these dream catchers hanging right in the windshields of the cars that are in the church from people that I know are members of that church and stuff like that, I'm not saying they're going to hell or something like that. Don't get me wrong. But by the same token, is that really what we want to present to visitors and other people?
Yeah.
Here's what we're bringing into the church. So one of the things we got to look at too is when Paul's talking about these things that shouldn't be in a believer's life, one of the big things he's got to look at is how does it reflect on the church? If you look at the one passage, which is clearly the church discipline passage for within the church, it's 1 Corinthians 5. Okay, Matthew 18, I think it's great policy, but it was written to the Jews. It was not written to the church. Okay. But if you look at 1 Corinthians 5, it talks about a guy who's sleeping with his mother-in-law, I think it is. And basically Paul's saying, how could you not put this guy out of the church? For his own sake too, but look at what it's doing to your reputation. Okay. Now I'm not saying we put people out of the church because they get a dream catcher. That would be too extreme. But my point is that we do have to look, as a believer, we have to look at how does this present Jesus Christ to other people when I'm at church, for example. And it's not that church is somehow more holy than other places or something. But you see what I'm saying? That's one of the things I would look at myself. Would I have a dream catcher? No, that's why.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want somebody looking at that and going, well, I wonder if he knows type thing. By the same token, I wouldn't also, I'm not going out and running down and tackling everybody with a dream catcher. But that's just one example. But it is, whether we see it or not as that, it really is a witchcraft type thing.
Okay.
That kind of thing. Now, again, would I say for your wife, would I go confront her? No, I don't think you should either. Probably not. The reason being, your wife really isn't a spot where, she's not coming along. You see what I'm saying? In that case, no, that's, give it time, see what happens, but I probably wouldn't confront her either if I were you.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it. I'm just saying, like.
Yeah. But if you did.
It's a piece of art for her, right?
Yeah.
It is basically a piece.
And
Yeah,
until you said something.
Yeah.
If I had seen.
Oh, you wouldn't have known.
Oh, I just said, okay, some.
Yeah, so I get, like when we were talking about when we were talking about idolatry, and I was trying to bring up Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, no, that's not really idolatry. These are just big fans, something like that.
I would say this: the way the original word was used in the.
Oh,
okay.
You're talking about definitions.
Yeah. If you're talking about today,
yeah,
it fits the way we use the word idolatry. If you talk about it in the Greek, no, it would not fit it.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, because and basically they're literally talking about carved up things that you're worshiping and bowing down to, and figures and things of that nature. They're not talking about Taylor Swift type thing. If we're talking about how we use that word today, yeah, she's certainly an idol to a lot of people.
Okay, so
no question.
So but this little dream catcher to her, like, it's
right.
Interesting that somebody said, "Oh, this keeps bad dreams away."
Right.
Like but whether she probably doesn't really believe it.
No, she probably
It's
doesn't.
kind of like, she believes in God, but she doesn't really think about it probably past that. Like I didn't.
Right.
For most of my adult life.
Sure.
Until at some point I did.
And something else to look at also. Is this something where, for example, let's take crystals as an example. There's nothing wrong with crystals. Crystals are beautiful formations that God made.
Right.
Even though many witches have corrupted them and put them into their practices and used them as corrupt practices. But that doesn't make the crystals bad. So therefore, just because somebody had crystals, I wouldn't say, we got amethyst and stuff sitting around the house.
I have a beautiful one.
Oh, yeah. The one from the graveyard or the one from the catacombs?
Catacombs wasn't a crystal. That was.
Yeah, that's right. That wasn't a crystal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had the rose quartz.
Yep.
We'll talk about Linda's issues with rocks some other time. She can tell you about that. But the point is that just because somebody, in other words, in that case, that's somebody taking something that's fine and corrupting it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have crystals. I have no problem with,
Right, but
Right.
we're completely
But-
unaware.
right.
We can't be
but here,
completely unaware.
I
of that.
understand that, but what I'm saying is, on the other hand, if you have something that its design and purpose was for, great example here, Ouija boards.
Yeah.
Does anybody know where Ouija boards were invented and what they were originally called?
You did this last week. It was a Satanist, I think, or it was a witch or
Sort,
something.
yeah. Actually, it was from Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah.
That's where they were invented. And it was the Baltimore talking witch boards. And they were literally designed, they were never designed for anything except for witches to use to communicate with demons. That was the purpose of Ouija boards. Designed, I believe it was the late 1890s, or the 1890s, if I remember, 1880s or 90s. And it was literally witches' supplies. It was almost witches' supplies. That's where they go to get these things.
But I gotta believe that even there's a Ouija board with letters on it. If a demon can use that to position things, he can also position my pen to write words on this paper. If
He can,
there's some kind
sure.
of mental
He
connection.
can,
there.
but on the other hand, that pen was not created for the purpose of communicating with demons. Today, one of the, I won't go into all the details. There's some real issues with why Parker Brothers actually bought the Ouija board. It's funny also, Parker Brothers, when I saw their factory when I was a kid, you know where their headquarters was, rather? It was a completely black building in Salem, Massachusetts, right on the river. And they're the ones that ended up buying the Ouija boards and making pop. They were never a kid's game up until then.
Can you mass produce a demonic tool?
Yeah, you can.
This
And
is
let me say this,
Yeah.
Linda, what are your thoughts on Ouija boards? You want to share any?
Well, aside from the story that I told
That's
last
what I mean.
week, you were here, weren't you?
I was here. I heard
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and I don't doubt it at all.
Yeah.
I've heard
Oh.
many stories where that worked. Not only that, I've heard many stories when they talk. How did you get into Satanism or demonism or witchcraft? It started with a Ouija board.
I mean, but I feel like there's got to be some kind of like incantation on each of these before they go out.
No,
I've
Because to
heard
me,
that
I mean, I
that
can
works.
cut.
and they might do that too.
I
don't
can cut
know.
a board and put letters on it, and I don't think it's going to make it a Ouija board.
Yeah, but that's not a Ouija board. These Ouija boards are specifically for this purpose. When Parker Brothers put these boards out, they're copying the Baltimore Talking Witch boards.
Carleton?
Yeah.
One thing that I left out of that story last week. Well, two things. I called it a witnessing tool, and here's my 11-year-old logic. It was, if I can prove that Satan exists, then they have to know that God exists too, because God created him. So that's where my brain went, which, it's ridiculous as a kid. But
Yeah.
the thing I didn't say is when I went home, walking home that day, I felt different because I wasn't alone.
You felt. You mean the
I
person?
had a demon with
Oh,
me.
you had something.
Oh, it literally can attract them.
It
Yeah.
followed me home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let me we're running out of time here. Let me hit something real quick here. And I want to hit kind of the end of the verse and sum up this verse we're in so we don't go back to next week, okay? If we look at these things, he goes over all these various things you shouldn't do, and it says, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you that those who practice such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. When he says, and things such as these, this list is not a comprehensive list of what should be avoided. The one thing that I always talk about is what I call the smell test. You ever go to your refrigerator and you go, I wonder if the milk's any good or not? You know what I'm saying? Well, maybe, no, well, I don't have any other milk, I guess it's okay type thing, okay? I would say this, apply the smell test to everything in your life, but do it with the spiritual guidance you got from the Bible. Because that's where Paul, I think, is saying here is, it's not just these things only. There's certain things, when we look at them, we go, yeah, that just ain't right. Let me ask you another question. Think of this. And was it you and I talking this morning? Somebody I was talking to. I think it was you. We were talking about the idea of, could you glorify God while you're doing that thing? Okay? And it's one thing to ask yourself, if you're doing something and you're saying, could I witness to the person next to me while doing this? And suddenly you go, whoa, no way. Okay, maybe that's not something that should be in your life. If on the other hand, you say, yeah, sure. As it was one time, and it was a weird one, but I've mentioned you that when we were talking about it, at Pasta Plus restaurant, before it closed. Wonderful, used to be a wonderful restaurant. It ended up with like half of a room being believers and people who wanted to know more about the Bible. And I was just sitting there studying my Bible. And I was by myself that night. Linda wasn't with me that night. And it ended up with like half the room almost turning into like a 20-minute Bible study. Not intentional, but people, hey, what about this? Hey, what? And it turned out everybody in that section, all the other people that left and all the people that were left, they all wanted to talk about it. So sure, why not? Could I witness? Now the reason I bring that up is, could I witness while I was sitting there with a glass of wine on my table, drinking a glass of wine? I did. No problem at all. But had I been drunk? problem. Had I been offending other believers, that would have also been a problem. I'm not going to try to drag somebody else into it or something like that. And not only that, if I go for the next 10 years without a sip of alcohol, I'm not going to miss it that much. You know, I think it's nice with steaks, it's nice with pasta. And for me, literally, I take it because of the medicinal effects sometimes it has on my intestines. It's always settled them right down, which is wonderful. And just a sip or two there. But the point being is, could I do that and glorify God at the same time? Yes, I could. Could I go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and drink and witness it? No, I couldn't. I've never been an alcoholic. But the point is, that would be just teasing and tempting those people in a wrong way. Could you run a loan shark operation and witness to people at the same time? I don't think so. You see what I'm saying? So this is a smell test I'm talking about. Just say to yourself when you're saying, is it a gray area? Can I still glorify God doing this? That's the real key. And not only that, then secondarily, could I witness to somebody? Could I talk to somebody about God? And if you can, I wouldn't worry about it. Generally, I wouldn't worry about it. If you got a totally corrupt conscience, it's another story. But generally, I wouldn't worry about it. But here's my point is, we got the smell test that Paul's talking about with, it's just, some of these things we just know they're not right and we can't explain it. And there are some things which would be wrong for some people and not for others, depending on the situation. Okay. As I said, a good example is if you're a recovering alcoholic, you probably don't want to sit down and start taking swallows of wine. If on the other hand, you've never been drunk in your life, you don't have alcohol, you don't have relatives that are drunks or anything else, like me, it's never been a factor. It's no big deal. So again, but again, I would be careful. If I'm going to offend somebody by doing that, I don't do it. It's that simple. And there have been times, there was one church I went to for a number of years I didn't drink. Why? Because there were a couple of people who really would have been offended by that and I was friends with, so I just didn't drink for a couple of years before I met you. The other thing I want to talk about is...
Drinking when he met you.
I know. Well,
I know, then she grew up to me, what can I say?
Yeah, to change churches.
Actually, from what I've heard, I think, you changed churches, but from what I've heard, I'm usually the one who gets blamed for corrupting everybody else, so it's not that. Let me say this. One other thing I want to point out in verse 21, and really the whole thing here, two things. Number one, this is a reputation of the church thing as well as the individual. Don't let the individuals destroy the reputation of the church. And the second thing I want to look at is that last half of the verse, and those that practice these things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. That almost sounds like a works-based salvation. It's not. Okay? You got the same thing in 1 Corinthians 10:13, I think it is, and 6 as well. You got places like that where this is not a works-based salvation. I think this is basically just saying it doesn't mean, for example, I don't believe that every person who commits one of these sins is suddenly booted out of heaven or something like that, or loses their salvation. I certainly don't believe that. By the same token, it's also something where if this is characteristic of your lifestyle, your salvation is not dependent on that, but I think this is showing what your inner heart is.
You're unlikely to find God if this is your life.
Or yeah, you're unlikely to have God in you if this is your lifestyle as well. If this is your regular lifestyle and everything else. If you're a carousing drunk that's beating up your family and outbursts of anger all the time, I'm not saying it couldn't be, but honestly, that's really an indicator of the heart position. And the heart position is the type of thing where it's saying, take an example from this week. I don't know what your position is on this. I have been watching this MS-13 guy, and when, not listening to the main news, but to get from somewhere here in Maryland, okay, that got expelled to El Salvador. Whatever you think about the expulsion or not, the first thing is, I'm hearing people present this guy like he's some kind of a saint that just, and when you look at him, it's like, okay, look at the smell test, look at the tattoos, look at the fact that his wife has come out and said, yeah, he beat me regularly. Look at on and on and on. There's nothing about him that passes the smell test. And what I'm saying is, I don't know the guy personally, but I would be amazed if he was a believer. I really would be, because you look at him and it just does not appear to be the heart of a believer in this person.
I have a question about
Sure, go ahead.
Sentence. Is the structure of it like one where you could read it backwards? Those who will not inherit the kingdom of God are those who live like this?
I think that's a good way to learn from it. I wouldn't do it grammatically because from a logical standpoint, you never want to take the converse and assume it's true. But yeah, I think it's something that certainly,
that would lean less into the works-based.
Yes, exactly.
Reading of it.
Exactly, and I would agree with that. So I wouldn't read it that way, but I think it's good to look at it that way and see the principle there. Yes.
Well, and the word
Yeah.
is actually people who practice this kind of behavior.
Exactly, not people who've done it
It's more
once.
specific than just,
Yeah.
You did it yesterday,
But
never again.
by the same token, I will say this: I have known people that I'm convinced are true believers who have fallen into alcoholism, for example, okay, or drugs, and they simply can't get out of it. So I would not say you lost your salvation or you didn't have it in the first place. But I would say generally we're talking about if people are practicing this, it's showing what their heart is. And it's fun. A lot of times you get to know a person, it's like, it's fun. Have you ever walked up to a person, I've done this before, and looked at them after knowing them a little while, are you a Christian? I mean, in a good way. Like, you act like a Christian, and yeah, I am. You know, I bet several of my friends, you know, one's guy I'm really good friends with now. And I just like, are you a believer? Yeah, I'm a deacon in a Baptist church. Okay, great. You know, you see what I'm saying? So sometimes it was like the heart attitude was coming through in the way he treated people and his actions and everything else. And that's one thing we got to look at is, I fall down on this myself, is does our heart attitude of being a believer show to other people? You know, I admit it doesn't always show with me. But by the same token, I'm trying and I'm doing what I can with it, but it all comes from being saved already and showing the heart attitude. So I like, from a learning standpoint, I like what you're suggesting. From a logic standpoint, yeah, but I know what you mean, yeah. But from a learning standpoint, yes, it certainly has nothing to do with whether people are actually saved or not. Doesn't mean you can't be saved because of this. By the same token, again, there's so many of these people you look at and you go, I just don't see it. You know, when you see these serial pedophiles and stuff like that, when you see people like that, it's like, you know, and you're telling me you're a believer and you're representing God and everything else, you know, it just, I don't know. I can't judge I don't know their hearts, but I certainly would say, wow, I hope, in some ways, I hope you're not, because you'll destroy the reputation of the church if you are. Don't want to sentence people to hell, but by the same token, we also don't want the church saddled with that kind of reputation. Anything else before we close it tonight? And we're going to start next week on verse 22. By the way, next week when we start on verse 22, what we're going to have is, all of a sudden, we're going to be talking about what should be happening in our lives. And any other questions or thoughts? Please.
Yeah, next week's Mother's Day.
Oh yeah, next week's Mother's Day. We're going to skip next week. Forgot about that. So no big deal for me, but I'll just say we'll skip next week and resume in 2 weeks. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm glad you thought of it because I forgot about it. So anything else?
There actually is one interesting thing about
Please.
this. I just noticed it.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, probably when I was doing the exegesis of Galatians thing, that whole section that starts with 16,
Yeah.
but I say walk by the Spirit, and then a little ways down, but if you are led by the Spirit, in verse 18, and then it comes along in verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit, and 25, if we live by the Spirit and keep in step with the Spirit. This is all about
Our
breaking
yieldiness.
yourself under the Holy Spirit and all of your behavior, basically.
And what you're talking about is almost a progression of yielding
Yes.
in through this chapter. Yeah. And not only that, it's chapter 5 in particular. That's where you wrote the paper on, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. In her.
Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. She.
That's a word you don't use very often.
Yeah. So yeah, she
What's the
actually.
word?
Exegesis.
The exegesis.
I translated the whole book of Galatians. I did a class when I was doing seminary.
Is that a compound word?
No.
Say it one more time.
Exegesis.
Does that have the word
Exit,
Jesus in it?
exit. You're
Okay.
Lifting
pulling
out.
meanings out of the
Right.
text.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Which, let me say this, I don't know if it's a word or not, but the other word I've used is eisegesis, where I hear a lot of
Yeah.
pastors are like, no, you're reading into that one.
People,
Yeah, exactly. So whether, I think that actually is a word, but I'm not sure. If not, I'm going to use it anyway.
well, people have used that as a
exactly.
counterpart,
Exactly.
or the opposite.
So no, she did Galatians. Matter of fact, when she finished Galatians, I actually got the title page for Galatians from the Geneva Bible, 1609, I believe it was, from a Geneva Bible that's, I think it's colorized too, if I remember correctly, back then. Parts of it.
Yeah.
And then had it mounted in a frame and everything, where it's nice. If you've been over her house, you probably see it sometime. And
Just tore it out.
no, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that church doesn't know anything about it, right? No, you can actually still buy not only Geneva Bible, but you can buy individual folios from and things like that. And that's what I bought was the actual.
So you got a
Galatians
framed,
page.
you can't open it up.
It's in a frame.
It's behind glass.
It's behind glass, yeah. Behind
Unless you
glass.
take it out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But that's what I gave to her for when she graduated, got done with the class.
I also got that old Greek New Testament from, it used to belong, what is it?
I ought to bring that in sometime.
Shoot. I can't
The
think of
collection
his
in
last name.
Ireland.
Yeah, it was a big estate where
Yeah,
the
famous
guy was
collection.
I think one of them was a pastor,
Yeah.
and the son owned the Bible that I have, but it's from like 17 something.
1727, I believe it is, or 1717, 1720, I think 1727, and that's one where I got it for your birthday, on one of your birthdays for you. And but yeah, found that one. I couldn't believe the price I got it for, because like I expected there's no way I'm going to be able to afford this. And it's like it went for that. It was in an auction,
Yeah.
and I still had to pay for it, but it wasn't what I thought it would be. But yeah, if you ever want to see an interesting Bible, the Greek New Testament from back then, it's one of the earlier ones around.
Is that because I don't think I've ever seen a Geneva Bible. Geneva Bible?
Geneva Bible is a translation, just like King James. It was, I think, 3 years. I think it's 1609, if I remember correctly.
But you got one of the ones from 1600. They still make them today, right? I could just go to a bookstore and pick one.
You could, but this was actually one of the early ones. You can still buy. You can still buy these
It's
pages.
very thick.
Yeah, but in other words, then sometimes they'll disassemble. They'll take ones that are damaged and they'll sell the extra pages that are left and stuff. So no, this is an original.
Oh,
The
okay.
page is probably,
Yeah.
like this.
Wow.
It's very big.
And you can tell it's certainly from, if not the first printing, it's certainly from that time frame.
Okay, I got an image from Pirates of the Caribbean when Captain Teague has to bring out the pirate code.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, exactly. Exactly.
something like that.
All right, let's go ahead and close in prayer, and we can talk to the one afterward. But let's go ahead and close in prayer. Father, we thank you for just opening our eyes tonight to what you have in the Bible. Father, I do ask again that we be able to apply these things to our lives, that we would avoid the things you want us to avoid, but also that we'd walk in the Spirit, and that we would allow the Holy Spirit to control our lives. I thank you for all you've done for us, and I ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen.